There we go, starting strong. Hello, everybody, and I'm very excited to be here. I've already heard, I think, what are some very cool Minnesotan terms of phrase when we were getting ready, and that just delights me. I'm a person who grew up in Rhode Island, and now I live in Los Angeles, and people don't have interesting ways of talking here, except saying things like dude and bro, and that's just not interesting or exciting in any way. All right, so that's me. You're going to see on a bunch of these first slides, resource room page, but I think Sarah was going to throw that in the chat too. There's a couple places where I talk about research articles, and so I give you the citation, and in some cases I give you the whole article illegally, because really, honestly, we're all taxpayers. Shouldn't we all have access to research? So don't get me in trouble for that, but I think it'll be okay. So sometimes I cite things and I don't really go over them, so I want to make sure you have access to some of the stuff that I cite. So I was a classroom teacher for more than 10 years. I was both a special educator and a general educator. And I then became obsessed with creating more meaningful mathematics opportunities for kids with disabilities in math. And so I went back and got my doctorate. And I'm currently an associate professor at the University of Santa Barbara, University of California at Santa Barbara, in both special education and math education, which is very unusual, actually. So there's a website there, a link, and in it, I also put even illegally access to everything that I publish. So if I publish an article, there is either the official version of it, and if they won't let me post the official version of it, then I can give you what they call pre-press, or the last edit before it became official. So I make sure you have access to everything that I write, and I think all researchers should as well. Okay, and then here's a picture of my book. I'm really excited about this book. It's for teachers. And I've been working on it for more than 10 years, and I found out that it's actually easier to write academic articles than to write a book for teachers. And I'm so much more proud of this than I am of any piece of research I ever did. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about it at the end, but there's a code there. Raven25 gets you 25% off at Corwin and free shipping. So that's information. If you need it, you need it. All right. So as we are going through this, I would love for you to ask questions and put them in the chat right away. Sometimes I'll stop and address it, especially if I just say something confusing or you need clarification. I'd love to address that immediately. Other larger questions, Sarah's going to be looking, and we'll keep them for the Q&A. And the other things that I would like to say is that I do some critiquing in this presentation. I critique some people that I actually work with. And so I would like to make sure that people are respectful about other human beings. And the reality is that educators and researchers I would say, as far as the ones I've met, they are in it for the children. We all care about students, but people have some very strong opinions about things like pedagogy and can get a little nasty. And I'm not into that. And I hope that we can keep it. I mean, but you guys are from Minnesota, not to judge you, but you're nicer than other people. All right. So yes, that's basically it. So in this session, what I'm going to try to do is talk a little bit about research, about the questions that our field has, and how sometimes different areas of research, specifically special ed and math ed, can have really different ways of framing research, framing math teaching, and framing math learning, which can create misconceptions between people working in those fields. And what I want to do is I don't want to tell you what to think. I want to give you some tools and just practice being critical about research, because I think people are just throwing the claims around a bit. They're doing it a bit. So we're going to first think about what matters in math ed right now. We're going to unpack some research claims on a website called The Science of Math. We're going to think about how research is different between STEM education and special education. And this is an area I've done a bunch of research in, so I will try to explore that in a reasonable fashion. And then we're going to use that to sort of help us think about how a binary between instructional methods, and what we're going to focus on today is the explicit instruction versus inquiry instruction battle, how it's pretty much an oversimplification of research and teacher practice, and I think we need to move on a bit. There are important things to say, but I'm not sure that that's the one thing we can describe. So that might be controversial, or you haven't thought about it that way, or you totally think that way and you're like, thank you for saying that. We'll see. We'll see. I also, throughout this, I am okay with you being critical and questioning me because truly my intention is to help us develop criticality. So that means that like if you put something up like, where's your citation for this claim? Do it. That's what I want you to practice doing. Please, I'll give you points. You'll get a point for every time you question something, and those points will become something. No, they won't, but you will get a point. Maybe we'll put it in the chat. All right, so I want to start with us thinking a little bit. I kind of want to know what, like when you signed up for this research in math ed, what was burning for you? So what research claims are you hearing, seeing about students learning mathematics right now? Which ones do you have questions about? So you can label them Q1 or Q2, but if you don't mind, throw into the chat some of the things that are burning for you. You guys are really bringing in the classics. I love it. These are all of the things that I would have, all the different things I could have made my presentation on. All right, I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds, but you can keep adding them in. All right, so some of these, I don't know if they're question 1 or question 2, but I'm sure it's kind of a combo, right? Ooh. Okay, these are good. All right, keep them coming. Let's think a little bit about the what problems do we face in math education? So you can think about that. You don't have to put that in chat because it's like a big list. But right now, when we think about what research needs to be solving the problems we actually have, right? The problems that exist that we have to solve as teachers and as myself as teacher educator. And so we've got a big problem. I see it as a problem that math has a long history of being told at students. Student disengagement from math, and the size is not indicative of the size of the problem here. This is just a slide I made my own fun. A big problem we have is inequitable outcomes in math based on race, languages spoken, poverty, and disability. Like that's a problem we had before the pandemic, but we still have it. The disengagement from math is something that's gotten worse since the pandemic. And what I've seen, we have narratives and truth about kids being further behind in mathematics. And some people act like it's just something that's in the media. And yeah, the media makes it worse, but it's also real. And we have students who report higher amounts of depression and stress and anxiety that make it hard for them to do well in school. And we have this, which should be much bigger, overworked, overstressed teachers. And we have a lot of things coming down the pipeline for teachers. We have, like, for example, the science of reading. We have for elementary school teachers, they've been dealing with this in a lot of different states, and I guess in yours as well. So these are some of the issues that we face. And one of the things that researchers are supposed to do is help us simplify some of these problems by giving us solutions, or at least an understanding of what the solutions are. One story I'm starting to hear a lot is that this situation, the fact that the scores have gone down, should then turn into a battle about whether inquiry or explicit instruction is better. The idea that if we pick one and go hard, we're going to fix these problems. So, okay, I forgot to fix these slides. I made them really weird. We're going to have to move on. Oh, no. Okay, that was embarrassing. All right, here. So mad. All right, look at if you can look at this. It's too small. So we'll have to look here. Can you see this graph? It's like scores decline during pandemic, remain higher than 1970s. So for a minute, let's take a second and think about the kind of bigger picture. Like we have that dip from 2020 to 2022, which is problematic. But what's the story from 1973, which happens to be the year I was born, all the way to 2022 and to 2020 and 2022? I was just thinking about this today, and so I kind of marked up this little slide. That kind of rough phase is when I was learning math in schools. And then this next one is like when I was teaching math. And if you asked me what has made the test scores go up in general over that period of time, what do you think I would say? Or what would you say? Without thinking about this last little dip, what do you think has changed since 1973 in the last 50 years? Because I happen to know that I am 50. Oh. Want to throw those in the chat, maybe? Now, in some ways, they haven't changed a ton. Well, I don't really know this metric, actually, 2020 to 241. I'm not sure. Well, we've got math standards. We have sort of a slow, but way slower than we'd like it to be, shift in teaching. When I was a kid, this picture, which I really adore, which I found recently, where the girl has to stand there and like the teacher has her like poker thing. She's like, math, math, math. That's how I learned math, and I would learn it and then forget it and then move on. And until I started teaching math, like many of us, I didn't really understand what was fun about it or what I loved about it. And I learned a ton about how to teach math. And yet in a lot of ways, and based on research in multiple classrooms, we haven't actually changed the way we teach math a ton. So to me, this whole idea, to me, this kind of throws a rock into this argument that to fix this problem, we need to go back to explicit instruction alone. I'm not sure there's a really good argument that explicit instruction created this increase in test scores, and thus we need to do more explicit instruction to get higher test scores, like we have gotten slow incremental progress in math over the last 50 years. I think there's been less explicit instruction, not more, although it still is the majority of instruction in schools in general in math. So I think it's a tired argument to talk about what works best, explicit instruction or inquiry instruction. And wired, yes, I'm acting cool. What's wired? What instruction works best for what goals, under what conditions, for whom, for what mathematical topics? And I've added it in another slide, in what order? So in what order of learning also, I think is a much more interesting question than which works best, one or the other. So to define these terms, inquiry-based instruction is actually harder to define because explicit instruction has a very clear, very specific definition that's agreed to by those people that use it. Inquiry-based instruction, people don't always agree on what it is. But in general, we can call it lots of different things: reform, student-centered, problem-based, and it's a very large category of different kinds of methods. But the goal is that students are sort of taking the lead in learning. They're doing a lot of problem solving. They're solving problems using what they already know. They are not necessarily told exactly how to solve the problem, and they have choice in how they solve problems. Whereas explicit instruction, we can call it direct instruction, which it's actually related to. Sometimes it's called traditional mathematics, teacher-centered. These terms are not all exactly the same. But explicit instruction and direct instruction are a specific sequence that includes teacher modeling and student practice. I do, we do, you do. There is modeling and there's practice until mastery. Tasks are broken up into smaller segments. All these things are really important. And the goal of a lot of this work is very specific skills and procedures. So in general, inquiry, we might say, is we explore a topic first, whereas explicit is we tell first. And I don't think, I'd love to hear it, but I don't think people on either side of this debate would necessarily disagree with what I just said, because some people feel you need to explore first, and some people feel you need to tell first. So a couple other terms as we go forward. Qualitative research is research that is not based on quantifying something. That's quantitative research. Qualitative research is what I generally do. I study math identity in students, how students of color with disabilities construct math identities, how motivation matters for that, how they understand themselves as math learners, and how they learn from teachers who they are as math learners. That's something that I'm doing a research project on that right now. And quantitative research is looking at big trends. You have to have a validated instrument. It has to be norm reference or criterion reference, but it has to be the same tool used for bunches of different kids where you get results across in the aggregate. Mixed methods is both things. And some people would disagree with me, but most people in educational research think the best method is the one that answers your research questions. So it's not about the one method is like superior to others, because they're very different. And all research has limitations. Quantitative research is often taking such a big picture view that you can't see who it doesn't work for, who it does work for, what kind of classrooms it works for, what kind of classrooms it doesn't work for, where you can, qualitative research in math ed, for example, often looks at one classroom, learning one topic, what works, what doesn't work, so you can see it in sort of an ecological space. You can see what works in what context, which you don't see with most quantitative research like randomized controlled studies. But both are important and both are wonderful. There's nothing bad about either one of them. All right, so a couple of other terms. Basic research tends to mean in the sciences, it means basic research in like the way the world works. In education, it might be something that understands, say, how the brain works, biological and cognitive processes. When we say the word research-based, we mean that it's designed or based on high-quality research. That doesn't mean that the exact thing you're talking about has been researched and found to be effective. So, for example, universal design for learning, which is a focus of my book and I adore, is something that I would say is research-based because it's based on a ton of research. But there is not really a study that took UDL and did a massive randomized controlled study. I mean, there are a few, but then I wouldn't say it's something that I would say is strongly evidence-based in that there is no specific study of its evidence, of its efficacy. I hope that makes sense. Ask questions in the chat if you don't. The word evidence-based, some people use it for whatever, but people who work in like the What Works Clearinghouse, they mean something very specific and small by it. The word evidence-based means causality in the study. So it has to be a study that can prove causality, and there's really only two kinds of studies that can do that: randomized controlled experimental studies, or single case, I didn't mean to do that, or single case multiple baseline design, which is a methodology I am learning right now for a study on math games, which is incredibly fun. And all research has limitations. I can keep saying this because whenever people tell you about research and they don't tell you about limitations, that is not, that's not really describing the full picture of what people are finding out. So here's a weird example that came up the other day when I was like preparing this talk for the first iteration. I was doing this bug thing. Have any of you guys done this? It's like it's really tiring. I was doing it because I want to develop a strong core, because I know that will help me live longer and be stronger, right? I want to do strength training because I'm now 50 years old, right? So I'm doing this one, and as I'm doing it, I'm thinking, has this been researched? Or did somebody make this up, put it in a blog, and now people are using this? I don't know. What is the research based on this bug situation? Because it's really, I'm getting exhausted, which of course probably does mean it is working, right? So it could be that this particular practice has been researched, and that would make it evidence-based. But it could be that this practice is research-based, which means that the people who designed it on principles of science. One is not necessarily better than the other, but they teach you different things. And even if it was evidence-based, so they have studied this in 37 humans, that does not mean it's going to work for me, because I'm a different human being. And one thing we've learned from nutrition science and from health science is that there is a ton of variability in human beings. The scientist at Universal Design for Learning, Todd Rose, he talks about how individual variability is the most important finding from neuroscience in the last 20 to 30 years in education. It's the most important thing we should understand as teachers. Now, I don't think it's going to work for all of our kids because that variability is fundamental and something we need to plan for. So what we're going to do now is with that little kind of background information, we're going to dive into doing a little bit of analysis of a website. And the website is called The Science of Math. And this site popped up about 2 years ago after, we all started hearing about the science of reading. It's a website. Some people call it a movement, but I know that a lot of the people who are on the website are the people I see talking about it in various places. So I'm going to reserve the word movement until I'm really sure it's a movement, but it's definitely a website. It's a group of people. And it is one strong story that plenty of people believe about what constitutes good math teaching. So this underneath is some things from the website. So it says its goal is to use objective evidence about how students use math. I feel very confident critiquing something that wants to come out and say it's the science of math, because that's a pretty serious claim. That's like me making a website and saying, I know everything about math. Listen to me. I am the expert #1 of America. So that's a pretty serious claim. So I feel like they should be excited and invite, some discussion around the claims that they have. So they talk about on the webpage, well-researched instructional approaches and research about how students learn. Okay. These all get hearts because I love all of these things. Multiple kinds of research. Oh, objective evidence. Love it. I love all of these things. They're wonderful. So some of these images come from these sort of teacher handouts that are on the webpage. And some of this stuff is super useful. The part on universal screening in mathematics, if you need to do universal screening, it's excellent. Like here, they're talking about how math proficiency can't be measured using a single general outcome measure. That's very true about mathematics, and it's important when we're doing intervention to not just be like one score intervention. So there's some really useful things. I love the rope that comes from another source about how math proficiency is concepts and procedures, strategies, reasoning, and disposition, whether you see math as useful and worthwhile. There are, however, other pages that confuse me. And so here is one of them. And this is what we're going to go a little deep into. We're going to think about inquiry-based versus explicit instruction. So this page is, just to orient you, it's under in the website under misconceptions or myths about teaching math. And the common misconception, and so I'm going to give you a chance to read this. And if you go to the resources, I know that this font is not great, but I wanted you to sort of see all of this. I'm going to give you time to scroll through it and look at it. And so here's your question. What do you notice and wonder about this handout for teachers? What claims are being made? So you can write down in the chat, or you can just to yourself what you notice and wonder. And if you're going to identify a claim, say claim. Say, this is a claim that's being made. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to really look and think at this. I'm going to give you 4 minutes. Okay, so a lot of people are really thinking about the claim, explicit instruction facilitates creativity and is effective for all learners. And if you notice, you see that little tiny A there? That is the only place on the page where there is a citation to research, which I find pretty odd in a like website that says on its front page, we are all about research. Research is the most important thing to us. We're going to like provide evidence for everything. So that we're definitely going to dig in. We're going to dig into those citations that are under A. Here, though, there's some other things that kind of strike people. I think it's important to sort of say that whenever people tell me that there's a truth about teaching, I find that sus, as the children say, because I really don't think there is like, I mean, people ask me all the time because I'm a quote unquote expert in teaching kids with disabilities. So people will say, so what is the right way to teach a student with dyslexia? And I'm like, I'm not going to pretend to be a person who can give you a blanket statement that's going to work for all of the complex, amazing, wonderful, challenging, creative children that are dyslexic. I'm not going to promise that. And if I did, I really think I'd be, sort of claiming something that's not true. Anybody who basically tells me they know the truth, I'm suspicious of in education and outside. It's also a little confusing here about this whole what's a misconception and what's truth. At the bottom, there are some interesting statements. One misconception is that inquiry-based approaches increase students' feelings about math. I wonder what that means. What feelings? I'd love to know. Good feelings, bad feelings. Inquiry-based approaches increase math achievement. They're calling that a misconception. Oh, sus is suspicious. Students learn better when they are curious and interested in the problem. They're saying that's not true. That's a misconception. All right. We can get back to these, but let's focus on what most of you went to right away, which is explicit instruction facilitates creativity and is effective for all learners. And then there's a citation. Here are the papers that are cited. You have all of them, a link to every single one of them, a full copy of it in that folder, but we're going to go through them. All right. And this is when we kind of go, if I didn't hate the term deep dive, I would say we were going to do a deep dive, but I hate saying that for some reason. So I'm not going to. Wait, I just did. Ugh. All right. So the first article. So remember that claim. Remember the claim. The citation is next to explicit instruction facilitates creativity and is effective for all learners. Hold that. All right. So the first paper they cite is Alfieri et al., 2011, called Discovery-Based Instruction Enhanced Learning. Like, yes, discovery is somebody put, it's a loaded trigger word. It's a really old-fashioned term, which weirdly enough, researchers still use, which teachers don't really use at all. I mean, it kind of feels like an insult when people tell me that I do discovery learning, because I'm like, I don't understand. I feel like you think it's the 60s. Like, why do you talk like that? We do like problem solving, but it's not like they're alone in a room problem solving. All right, so this study compared a ton of different studies in a ton of different subjects. It's not just math. Math is just one of them. But they used 164 studies, and they did 2 different studies with them. So these are almost all laboratory studies. So studies done by educational researchers in sort of a laboratory kind of like setting, but not all of them. Okay, so the first study they did was a meta-analysis that said they took 108 studies and they compared 2 things. Discovery learning, when students learn completely unassisted by teacher, completely. So there's no questioning, there's no scaffolding. The problem is given, the teacher moves away. How much do kids learn under those conditions? Versus explicit instructional conditions, which include direct instruction, feedback, worked examples, and explanations provided. All right, people, what do you think across subjects, across studies, which will be more effective in kids learning something? I need to hear, I need at least 1 or 2 predictions in the chat before I move on, because I enjoy this part of it. Okay, we're guessing explicit is going to be more effective. Right. Yeah, I don't know my right from my left, but I think I know what you mean. Okay. All right, so in this first analysis, remember, the problems were in discovery learning were just given to them. And then there wasn't any scaffolding, discussion, small group work. They weren't talking to other kids about it. So what happened in that one is that the explicit instructional conditions was more effective. And to look at it from a slightly different point of view, if we have this long chart that has explore first and tell first, less support versus more support, unassisted discovery learning versus explicit instruction, this one study, and this isn't the end all be all, but the one study was like explicit instructional conditions are better. If you tell kids what to learn, they're going to learn the things more than if you don't. I am not surprised by this. Their second study in the same paper changed what they were comparing. So now they're comparing what they called enhanced discovery. I've never heard anyone else call it this, but that's what they call it. Or we could call it guided inquiry. And that included generation, which means there's like, you might ask like a notice and wonder or something to help kids start thinking about something. Elicited explanation. So the teacher is asking questions and the teacher asks questions of the students. And ask them to explain their thinking. And there's scaffolding and or feedback. So it's still a discovery problem or task, but those things are added. Versus explicit instructional conditions, but it's slightly different because they took out feedback. So direct instruction, explanations provided. So they told the kids what they were learning. Oh man. Okay. So now I showed you. That was horrible. Did you guys see it? Okay. So which one in this condition? Enhanced discovery or guided inquiry? So when they compared direct instruction to enhanced discovery or guided inquiry, what was more effective was guided inquiry or enhanced. They took out feedback because they put it in the category of guided inquiry. They didn't include all the same studies couldn't be, if it was direct instruction with feedback, they would keep it in explicit instructional conditions. But if it had feedback and it had enhanced discovery, they put it over in that category. That's what I'm guessing. There's not a ton of detail about how they classified studies here. I was guessing, I was looking up the studies and trying to understand how they did this. So one cite from this is that in the domains of math, participants evidence more learning in the enhanced discovery conditions than in the comparison conditions. So the person in the chat who's saying feedback is important. Yes, they still got feedback in the explicit instructional conditions. It just wasn't, they didn't just exclude it from the discovery one because there's tons of research on feedback in general, tons of it. Feedback is good. All right. So yes, they did not take out, I hope that's clear. They did not take out the feedback explicit instructional conditions. They just didn't put everything with feedback in the category. Does that make sense? Also, you can read the paper and then tell me what you think. So if we go to this diagram that I was working on before, at first we were comparing like the very outer edges of this graph, but now they've put something that has a little more support, guided inquiry or enhanced discovery. Okay, we're going to return to that later. All right, the second, and now think about it. Does this paper support the claim that explicit instruction facilitates creativity? And what was the other part of the claim? Let me look at your chat. I can't believe I forgot it because I'm obsessed with it. Facilitates creativity and is effective. Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right. Next study. This study was done by a major proponent of explicit instruction who's done some very wonderful studies about explicit instruction. And this study was a video recorded study. So what they did is they looked at a ton of previous recorded observations. So they have observations in kindergarten, 46 schools, 130 teachers. And they use a bunch of different curriculum. And these research took those, which were from another study, and they looked at them again and analyzed them for this study. What they were looking for is to see the relation. They were looking for evidence that explicit instruction increases achievement. And the way they were doing that by looking at coding for different kinds of interactions. So they coded for teacher demonstrating ideas, teacher giving feedback, student group responses, and student individual responses. So those are the conditions that they looked for, and there was a pre and a post test that already came with the data. All right, so this is a kindergarten. What they found was the only thing that had a correlation to increased achievement in mathematics in this big video survey was student individual responses, meaning that the more kindergarten kids were saying their own answers in math, and we don't know whether they were sharing a beautiful strategy or just sharing the answer. All this tells us is kids were talking about math in the whole group, and that correlated with achievement. But teacher doing a demonstration or an explanation did not correlate with achievement, nor did teacher giving feedback, which is, like we said before, different than a ton of other research on feedback. Educational research is complicated. And student group responses, that's a very explicit direct instruction kind of thing where the teacher is saying something and they're doing like a choral response. That didn't have a correlation either. Okay, so an individual response was an opportunity for one student to verbalize or physically demonstrate their mathematical understanding and thinking. That's the one thing that connected to achievement in this study. The one who does the talking does the learning. Nice quote. That's in chat. And this is a quote from the paper. In other words, individual response predicts math achievement over and above instructional quality, the converse of our hypothesis. This is explicitly stated in this study. Does this support the claims that explicit instruction facilitates creativity and increases achievement? Okay. Third article. I cannot pronounce the name. This is a study in undergraduate economics, which first is like, okay, it's about teaching critical thinking, but in economics. And it's showing that in this particular study, they did a control group and a non-control group, and they basically told the non-control group, the intervention group, we are teaching you this skill. Here's the skill you're going to learn that's critical thinking. Here's how you do it. And then they assess them. And I'm really not surprised that the one that was about critical thinking, where they told them about the kind of critical thinking, they did better on that kind of critical thinking. I don't know if anyone is not surprised by that, but you know, the great thing about explicit instruction is that when you assess something very specific and you tell them something very specific, it is easier to get better results in research than if you're like, here's a task and it's complicated, different stuff might emerge, and we're going to research it in more like less specific ways. But I like this study. However, does it support the research claims that explicit instruction supports creativity, not critical thinking, creativity, and increased achievement in mathematics? All right, the last study, Morgan, oh no, there's two more. Morgan, 2015. This is a study about first grade. And in this study, they had a really big sample size. They also used an existing data set, but this existing data set had no video. So this is a teacher self-report study, which some people believe are sus. I mean, I think they can tell you something interesting, but basically it's like they sent out a survey to a whole bunch of teachers. How do you teach math? And there have been some studies that, and it's different in different studies, but sometimes teachers don't even I mean, how many great teachers do you know that don't even know they're great? Like, they're like, oh, I don't know. I'm not that great. I don't know what I do. All right. So they took kids, they put them into two categories, kids with mathematical difficulties and not mathematical difficulties based on how they scored on the math scores in kindergarten. So now it's first grade. Those kids are all mixed up. They asked these first grade teachers, how do you teach math? And they grouped them into two categories, student-centered and teacher-centered. And they found that for students with mathematical difficulties, now they're giving these kids a label based on their kindergarten score. So please, also, this is a little weird, but they're saying that for kids that didn't have like low scores, it didn't matter. They both got better test scores. It did not matter whether it was teacher-centered or student-centered. But for students who had lower scores in kindergarten, teacher-centered pedagogy was more related to increased test scores. Now, this is one of the critiques of this study is that it, like one of them was like kinesthetic movement was like student-centered and like using music. So it's kind of dated, in my opinion, on like the survey, like what is student-centered? It's also from 1998. All right, the data is from 1998. Okay, So what claims does this research support? Does it support the claim that explicit instruction facilitates creativity and increases achievement? Here, it increases achievement for kids who had lower scores to some degree in sort of a blanket way. Okay. Now the last study, Stockard et al. This is a meta-analysis of direct instruction, capital D, capital I, very specific kind of explicit instruction that came first. And it's very specific in its sequence. It's very much teacher modeling. I'm going to say I do. I say it wrong all the time. I do, we do, you do. Right. Yes, very much so. And in this, they did 50 years of research. They had a bunch of studies, and they found a positive effect size for direct instruction in all areas except affective measures. So anything that measured how kids felt about themselves, their motivation, their attitudes, they found no positive relationship. Though weaker effect in math than in reading, and there was not as many studies in math at all as reading. And this does not compare it to inquiry instruction or anything else. It's just the efficacy of direct instruction. All right. I do wonder, like retention of concepts, that's not being studied in this. But they found a decline in maintenance of skills in math. So they're not looking at conceptual understanding, but they did find that the direct instruction, while effective in terms of its effect sizes, was less effective over time. Kids were forgetting what they learned. Does this support the research claims? Not creativity, yes. But it supports the other one, doesn't it? Come on. This supports that it is effective. This is a meta-analysis of many studies. So, now looking at these as a whole, do the citations support these claims? And what claims seem unsupported by evidence here on a website that's purporting to be about evidence? How can it support effective when not compared to anything else? That is such a good question. And I think one of the things that like those who are not in educational research don't understand is that there are very few studies that actually compare those two. Very few. The Alfieri study is one of very, very few. Almost everything that gets cited is one or the other. Even inquiry-based work, it's not like they compare it to explicit instruction. Mostly they just look, is this new curriculum effective? Is this problem-solving method effective? Comparison is rare. Oh, sorry. So there's evidence that it's effective, but there's other evidence that they cited that it wasn't more effective than other kinds of instruction. So the evidence is mixed, which is actually true in educational research. As I say, it's complicated, but it is, I'm puzzled by why these citations were chosen. And this is still available on the website, but I have written about these a couple places and talked about them. And I think other people have also raised concerns about them. And now on the webpage, if you go to it, it has different citations, some of which are still problematic, but new, but they still keep the Alfieri et al. That first one is still listed as evidence that it is explicit instruction is effective for all learners. All right, keep the questions coming. So on the same website, on a completely different page, as evidence the fact that there are multiple authors to this, it says explicit instruction has an exceptionally strong research base for students who experience difficulty with math, but may also be beneficial for teaching math to all students. Now, this is a very accurate statement because there is a lot of research on explicit instruction with students with disabilities and students who are have low test scores in mathematics. And we'll talk about why that's true in a minute. May also be beneficial for teaching math to all students, yes, but the research is much stronger or much more prevalent or exists in much bigger quantity for students with disabilities. And this research comes from special education. But I'm going to remind you of something that was in the National Mathematics Advisory Panel in 2008, a very conservative sort of research-focused endeavor. And they note, after they say there's a lot of research on explicit instruction for students with learning disabilities, they say it's important to note there's no evidence supporting explicit instruction as the only mode of instruction for students with learning disabilities. And I love this quote. I use this quote all the time. All right. Is the science of math the same as the science of reading? Oh, I'm going to get to your question, Dominic. Oh no, they bring up touchpoint math. How am I supposed to continue? Okay, the science of math, is it the same as the science of reading? The science of reading, as I sort of talked about a little briefly, science of reading actually is a 100-year-old term. You find it first in like some really old text. The science of reading is just like, we should be interdisciplinary about how we study reading. So that's people from linguistics, neuroscience, school psychology, communication science, developmental psychology. Education is like one of those fields. And the science of reading is, if I could give you a visual of how much research there is. I mean, one time they tried to see how much research there is in reading for kids with learning disabilities versus math. It was 17-1. Now it's a little bit better, but there's a big difference in research in reading versus math. There is more in reading. And there's been more interdisciplinary work, and that's what the science of reading is all about. Now, the science of reading is like made so simplistic. The way you hear about it, like it's just phonics, that is not the science of reading. That is a way oversimplification of it that's being sold to policymakers. Don't believe it. It's part of it, but it's not the whole thing. What you read in the media is not the whole thing. Big surprise. So this website, The Science of Math, it's not about teaching math to students with disabilities. It's clearly about teaching math to all students. But the people who are listed, and I took their names off here, I left their institution. I just looked at their names and I made this chart. So this is what institution they're at and what department they're in. So we can see here that most of the original contributors who wrote the website are in special education. A bunch of them are in special education, and the others are in applied psychology and counseling and school psychology. And school psychology is a really closely related field to special education. So every single person who was signed on and made this website is in special education or like school psychology. So that's why my specialty matters, which is like understanding the difference between these two fields. So let's talk about that for a minute. So before we do, we're going to talk a little bit about disability. And so I can't get engaged in that if we're going to think about it from the deficit point of view or oversimplify it, because disability is complex and common. ADHD, and lots of people have more than one of those identifiers that they identify with or have been diagnosed with, right? Everybody who has a disability also has a race and a gender and different ways of making sense of themselves, and that all matters quite a bit. So disability is not a bad word. It's used in the disability community proudly. And if you want to learn more about disability and math and learn from disabled mathematicians, that stuff is in my book, and I'm super happy about that, to tell a sort of different story about disability than the deficit story that we get way too much. So math education, this graph of mine starts in the 50s with clinical studies, moves into experimental psychology, behaviorism. Then there's something called the cognitive revolution, which has both information processing. The brain is a computer. That's where cognitive load also comes from, which I'm hearing about a ton now, like we're back in the 60s. And then constructivism. Wait, no, individuals learn by exploring. Kids learn by building new schemas based on what they already know. They learn based on like their own exploration. Sociocultural, which is about learning in groups. It's about discourse, and it's also about identity. And now we're sort of in a phase where we're also adding into the mix sociopolitical and critical stuff. So systems matter. Some systems are quite unfair. All this stuff sort of is the stew of math education, right? Special education also begins with the same roots, but it does not continue into sociocultural, sociopolitical. So I'm claiming this, and the reason I feel like I can claim this is I have actually coded thousands of articles in math to see which of these ideologies about learning or theories of learning are being used in research. So before we get to that, So another phrase I want to make sure everybody knows about is the learning sciences. Right now, you might be hearing a lot about the science of learning. No S, science. It's just like the science of math, like there's one. That term is new, the science of learning. A much older and more used term in academia is the learning sciences. The learning sciences take constructivism, socioculture work, sociopolitical work, neuroscience, cognitive science, and it's very interdisciplinary. A lot of our most amazing math educational researchers are in the learning sciences. Like Lonnie Horn is a learning scientist, and learning science means I don't just understand learning as being like, I'm not a behaviorist. I understand learning as complicated, complex, and involving multiple systems. So that's where people talk about learning now in academia in general, the learning sciences. The Science of Math website, as far as I can tell, is over here. It's in a very different space. It's really influenced by experimental psychology because of the kind of methods that are valued, behaviorism, information processing, that is the idea of cognitive load and the difference between novices and experts, that novices can't really learn things until they know more things. And that sort of understanding of cognitive. Jessica Hunt is my friend, and you should definitely look at her research. She's amazing. All right, so the learning sciences have a lot of different, because it's interdisciplinary, the findings are interdisciplinary. And there's a link to this in my resources, so I'm going to skim through it. Students learn well when they feel safe and connected. Learning is a process that requires effort and mistakes. Thinking, like the idea of productive struggle, is a part of the learning sciences, although they don't sometimes use different terms. Students are more motivated when they're interested. They learn more when they're motivated. These are things that are very different from that sheet we just saw from the Science of Math. And these are key principles of the learning sciences. So let's think a little bit more about special education and math education. So these papers are available in my resources. Myself and Dr. Paolo Tan have done multiple studies, and some of them with other people, where we look at research and compare it between special education and math education. And so some of this comes from that, although I did a little bit of a new analysis of some of the data. So are these two fields, I said they were different in terms of their background, but are they different in terms of, like, what are the methodologies? We talked about this earlier: quantitative, qualitative, and mixed. So STEM journals, this was mostly math journals, but I also looked at math learning articles that were published in like a science learning journal. So we're looking here at just two different fields: articles in special education or school psychology journals, or articles in STEM journals. And so in STEM journals, more of the articles were qualitative, right? Now predict what's behind the blue box. How is this different in special educational research about math? What do you think the most predominant methodology to understand math learning is? Mark has a prediction. Andrea agrees. All right. These are numbers of articles in my study. Yes, the ed psych background. Yes, absolutely. So there's a big difference here. Right now, I'm showing you that if you are in special education or have a disability, articles studying your math learning are almost completely quantitative. Whereas if it's studying just everybody's math learning, it's more likely to be this in-depth qualitative analysis where I'm trying to understand how you learn, like a topic in calculus. So those red ones, those are often studies of how kids think about particular math topics. Look how few of those there are in special education. Oh, bringing in IEPs, I love it. All right, the math content. So STEM journals is blue, special education journals, articles. This is a 5-year span that we looked at, about 2,500 articles, split into groups, about 2,000 in math ed, and forget that. All right, you can look back. Those articles have the specifics of math. Sorry, I'm losing my focus, trying to stay focused. Okay, the articles in the STEM journals are blue. So these are, here we have a count of how many articles were in each category: algebra, number, geometry, data statistics, and calculus. I keep meaning, whenever I show this slide, I mean to like reread the articles that were calculus and special education, because I'm like, I want to read those articles. So I don't remember them from doing it. But we can see a big difference in focus. So the special education, they're quantitative, and they're mostly focused on early number and operations. So topics that are in elementary school. That algebra stuff, if I could graph it over time, that's really developing. So there's more and more work about middle school, but there's not a ton. That's sort of just beginning. This is a confusing graph, but it will give you something. So we're going to take a moment to look at it. The STEM journals, and you have the N there that I couldn't remember earlier and I got confused by. And then the psychology and special education journals. So again, these are math articles within a 5-year span, 2013 to 2017. And we classified them based on their keywords in the abstract. So this is like a little bit of rough. It's a rough analysis. The medical is red, and that's like articles that were about things like eye tracking or about cognitive domains. The behavioral is understanding math learning through observed behaviors. Direct or explicit instruction was one of our keywords for that. Also, task analysis was another of our keywords. So we can see the difference between STEM research, 4% of the articles are behavioral. In special ed, 33% are behavioral. So that is a proxy in some degree about how much research on explicit instruction is done in special ed versus in math ed. Constructivism is blue, so you can look at the difference between research that's looking how students understand mathematics in detail. So that's a study of, okay, how do kids understand, like, how do they develop their understanding of a volume of conic shapes? Let's look at in-depth on how kids are thinking about this. There's a big difference in how much research there is that uses that point of view about learning. And last, I'll talk about sociocultural, which means it means that we learn in culture, we learn in groups. So that's about interaction, that's about group work. It's also about identity and who you become in a group of people. So there's a lot more research in math ed than in special ed. That's not really focused. And I think those are like my articles. Getting a couple of other people. So to compare them, math ed research uses a variety of methodologies. It has more variety. Like I can't sum up math ed research for you very well because it's actually, I mean, there's some behavioral stuff. There's some like information processing stuff. It's like many flowers are blooming. But in general, math is understood as inquiry and as a problem solving. It's something that kids do. It's a kind of way of thinking mathematically about tasks and understandings. And when equity is defined in this field in general, they can be defined as achievement or test scores or identity or participation or like whether kids go on to STEM careers versus the special education math research field is almost completely quantitative. So there's almost no analysis of individual children thinking. It is mostly about direct and explicit instruction. Math is generally understood like the goal of those studies is memorization of facts and procedures, accuracy and efficiency, like digits correct per minute is a really important measure of growth in those kind of studies. And equity is very specifically not defined in terms of how kids feel in class, how they're motivated. So like culturally responsive pedagogy is not, if it's a part of this research, it's defined as the topic of a word problem only. It's defined by achievement. So my question to you is, are these two different kinds of children? Are kids with disabilities so different from kids without disabilities that they need a completely different way of understanding their math learning? Is this about the kids or is this about the adults? I will say my philosophy is that it's mostly about the adults. Academic fields develop, they have certain ways that they do things, certain things they value. We like this kind of research, we don't like this kind of research. This is what we value, this is what we don't value. And researchers do that. And what has ended up happening is that we tell teachers stories that these are two completely different kids. Like if a kid gets an IEP, they now suddenly learn math completely differently. All right, so I'm going to skip to here. So explicit instruction and inquiry instruction, we were talking about how this is like such a tired battle. And I want to take a teacher point of view here. So first of all, what works? This is an oversimplified question. We're hearing people arguing about it, but it's very oversimplified. This comes from one of my favorite articles, and it's linked in the resources by Linda Darling Hammond, summing up what the learning sciences believes about learning and development. And it is an amazing read because it sums up what's really going on in neuroscience, not the oversimplified view of neuroscience, and how contexts are so important to learning. I learned a ton from that. They note that there are different kinds of learning, which call for different kinds of teaching. Educational goals increasingly emphasize problem solving and interpersonal skills needed for 21st century success, which cannot be developed through passive rote-oriented learning focused on the memorization of disconnected facts. Today's goals require paths to deeper understanding, supporting the transfer of skills and use of knowledge in new situations. So that's what they say. That's their opinion. That's what they value. So whatever we teach is about what matters to us and what we want to see and the vision we have for the kids in our classrooms. What do we want to give them? What do we want them to walk away with? That's the kind of instruction we need to give them, the one that matches our goals for them. So this is a little story about Mr. J. He's a 7th and 8th grade math teacher. I've been doing research in his classroom for 2 years, and he is in my new book, chapter 4, and also chapter 8 on assessment, which I'm not going to talk about, but he has very cool assessment. So he told me that he'd been teaching for like 12 years. I used to think I was doing the right thing if I'm just handing them the information and spoon feeding them every inch along the way. Then at the end of the day, I would feel exhausted. And I would think they knew it. They knew the math because I told them every little step, but what I've learned is it doesn't work. It doesn't mean my kids have actually learned everything. So he actually became so exhausted by this way of teaching that he looked for new ways of teaching. Here he is facilitating the generalization from a thinking classroom lesson, which he did in his class a ton. His goals shifted to problem-solving thinkers. His main goal with his middle school students was student confidence, so they would believe in themselves. His classroom was in a rural area in California where it was a very high poverty area. Many of his students were migrant workers or in the families of migrant workers. It was an inclusive classroom, so there were students with disabilities in this classroom. And it was one of the most amazing, wonderful, beautiful, kind, special spaces I've ever been in my entire life. Most of the days he would do, like, here's some images of kids doing thinking a visual patterns task in a thinking classroom, and the kids would be in groups. It was relaxed, it was comfortable, but they were very engaged in what they were doing. And he would do this kind of stuff again and again until they became good at it. But some days he would give short to the point direct instruction on skills and procedures. Here, this image is him checking in with an individual student. He did that a lot. He would look after every lesson, he would take all the student work, he would go through it, he'd put it into piles, and he would try to figure out if somebody needed like a reteach on something. Not that he had direct instructed in the beginning, but he was like, I'm going to check in on this. And if everybody needed something, he might do a whole class very short direct instruction. Like I saw him do like direct instruction for like 4 minutes. He talked to me, I asked him about this, and the first thing he said was, am I in trouble? I was like, I see you sometimes do more explicit teaching. And this is what he said, am I in trouble? And I'm like, you were like the most amazing human being teacher of all. And you would think I would put you in trouble because you're being more explicit sometimes. Oh my gosh. So I said, no, I feel like you have different ways of teaching, and I want to know more about how you make those choices. So he said, I had seen him do a very short mini lesson on the rules for operations with exponents. And I said, why do you do that? He goes, it just feels like a rule, so I teach it like a rule. He said, I don't know how to teach that with inquiry. If I knew, I'd do it, but I don't. So we did like some beautiful exponents explorations, but when I get to the rules, I show some patterns. Maybe we do some thin slicing in thinking classrooms. And then I try to just show them the rules and then have them practice. So for him, it depended on the topic. Almost most things were inquiry-based because of his goals. His goals were problem solving and confidence. And that's how we wanted to get to those goals. But sometimes he was more clear and more explicit. And so it depended on the topic. So for example, so we're moving from him for a second, and we're thinking in general, like what works best actually depends on the topic too, as well, right? So when kids are learning numbers and counting, we don't make them make up the numbers. That's social knowledge. We tell them the numbers, but there's a ton of inquiry and exploration in it, right? It's a combination of how kids learn how to count. If we think about subtraction, well, if we want them to learn the standard algorithm, which was developed culturally, but children, in my experience, have never independently invented the subtraction algorithm. If we want them to learn how to do it, we need to teach them directly how to do it, right? When we feel like it's something that I wait until they have place value before I do that, then I can teach them. But we also have seen in this particular area of subtraction that kids are more successful at adding to subtract than they are with the algorithm. And it is a spontaneous discovery. Subtraction by adding on, including kids with a lot of difficulty in mathematics. So kids, there's like multiple beautiful quantitative studies that have documented kids, including kids who have IEPs, kids who are way behind in math, inventing the idea of adding to subtract and then being more efficient and more accurate than any other method. So that they can discover because they naturally discover it. So it matters. Like some topics are wonderful for exploration and inquiry. Some are social knowledge and we need to teach them explicitly. So if we think about this continuum, I showed you it a little bit before, and this is something I'm playing with. I talk about it in my book, but I do not feel like this is some finished thing. So I love feedback on it. Instead of thinking of them as two methods that are in opposition, we can think of a continuum of support here, that sometimes we tell first, sometimes we explore first. So we talked about guided inquiry, right? That ended up being most effective in the Alfieri study. Here's some other citations of that kind of work that are in the resources. So this is the image from the front of my book, and I'm going to use it to sort of give examples here. So up here, we have a teacher in the second grade doing a thinking classroom, open-ended task. At this exact minute, that child is presenting, and she comes up to support him in presenting this like an algebraic thinking task in an inclusive second grade class. That's guided inquiry. You see how involved this teacher is in supporting them through the way. Guided classroom, the thinking classroom is not giving a task and walking away. There are tons of structure to promote engagement and thinking, right? That's guided inquiry. This picture here is a special education teacher teaching counting collections. But counting collections it's inquiry, but it's guided. There are structures in place in a workshop model to help kids count and share their collections. There's tons of teacher questioning. There's group work. All those things make it guided inquiry. Another thing I'm kind of fascinated with is when we actually give more support, but it's still inquiry-based. So I kind of made this, well, I didn't make the term up. Arthur Baruti used it, and I'm sort of trying to bring it into the discussion. Guided strategic development, where kids make up the strategies, but we do more heavy guiding, getting them there. So this teacher up here is doing a number string. And this is a teacher teaching second grade. And she is, these are all from my research project. So these are actual photographs that I turned into these cartoons. But she is doing a number string that's very like, number strings have a lot of structure. You sequence the problems, but you're not telling kids how to think, but you're giving a lot of support. So it's a little different than some task that has less support. And I also think it's really important to have one-on-one strategic coaching that sometimes veers towards more explicit instruction. Sometimes it's more open-ended. But really good teachers get in there, and this is Joe. This is Mr. J. Oh, Lord. I said his name. And he's sitting down with this one-on-one coaching, which he did, especially with kids who needed more support. And they told me in interviews how much that mattered to him. They said, he doesn't tell us how to do it, but he helps us get there. So that teacher, he uses guided inquiry, at times explicit instruction, less of it. Strategic coaching, guided strategic development. I saw all of these things in his classroom across 2 years. And I think that's why he was successful, because he changed and he modified it based on what he was teaching, where they were at, what extra support they needed, and what they needed individually. All right. So I think this last one, before we go to questions, is where I think educational research can get better for teachers and for our field. And the first thing I want to do less of is one-way or the highway statements about what works. I don't want to be given that. If I say that, you call me out, no matter where you said, call people out on that. Educational research, there is always a study that proves the opposite of what you're saying. I guarantee it. At AERA this year, which is the biggest educational research, there was like 13,000 presentations of research. You think people aren't finding the opposite of what you're going to be claiming? No. Be careful about what you say. assuming that the way it is in one research tradition is the truth, no matter what, that's just, it's not going to be helpful, whether it's what I agree with or what I don't agree with. Exaggerating or misleading citations, I hope to be called out on that if I do that. And I hope to say, I am sorry, I will do better. And what we could do more of is collaborative partnerships to address the most pressing issues in schools. I'm doing a project right now that with the idea of the administrators at a local district doing math games for intervention. And I feel so much better about doing research that's deeply embedded in what the district wants me to do and what they think is most important. I think that there is a ton of research. If we just communicated more about it, maybe we would learn. We don't have to do everything again. There's just a ton of research we haven't ever told teachers about. Interdisciplinary research is really important because I think you might have seen from this presentation that when we get stuck in a silo of a field, we start making claims and thinking the world is one way when it's not. I think we need to do more replication studies. Even some of the most important studies in math education have not been replicated, or they were unsuccessfully replicated. And that's not something we talk about. I think we need to be more open about that. And I think it should be law that if something becomes popular, there should be studies funded on it. So if there's something that everybody does and loves, visual patterns, I adore them. There should be money put aside for people to research that. And there isn't. You have to, like, it's just whose grant gets proposed at the NSF. That's my idea. If you know anyone at the NSF, you bring that to them. And then we need to have honesty and humility about the limitations of research, because all research has limitations.
Hello.
And so that's where I want to go with all of this. And I'm ready for questions. Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing.
I'm going to do a couple of announcements first. Put your questions. I have a few if you don't have them in a moment, but I'm just going to give a couple of announcements. Number one, and I'm going to share my screen. Hold on. Number one, this webinar today was hosted by the Minnesota Math Leaders. I don't know if you're a member of the Minnesota Math Leaders. One way to know, though, is if you didn't get an email from Sarah Vandorf in late April, you're probably not a member, and we would love for you to join our group. It's free. That's the good news. We meet in monthly PLCs. We have our PLCs for this month coming up next week. If you want to get connected to the group, we also host a ton of PD. I would love for you to join us. So in the chat are links for joining us at that if you want to join us. The Minnesota Math Leaders is in the process of planning the work, the book studies, the professional development, and all the things for next school year. If you have opinions on that, there's a super fast survey that we'd love your feedback on. I put the link for that in the chat. The other thing I want you to consider is to show up for, there are 11 sessions this summer of Math PD in a week during June and a week during August. Some of it is for the brand new Minnesota Math Standards in August. It'll be the only time this PD is offered in the next 5 years. So like if you're like trying to think ahead to our Minnesota standards, you want to show up, that professional development is during the week of June 17th and August 5th. And the link in the chat will get you to all the sessions. There's 4 sessions. Jenna Labe is going to be coming to Minnesota. You need to come out and meet her. She's amazing to help us with our release of information on the first anchor standard on data. And there is all kinds of information related to all those kinds of sessions. But I also want to highlight that there's sessions on building thinking classroom. I highly, 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 highly recommend this session that's highlighted in blue on the math language routines. It will also satisfy your CEU requirements for working with multilingual learner students. And if you are in a district and everybody's getting trained in letters and reading, one of the math equivalents of that is cognitively guided instruction. So consider coming out to some fluency trainings that Jim and others will be hosting. And you can find that on the chart. So we'd love to see you. And then just a reminder, Minnesota State Fair, there is a event we call Math on a Stick, where we do amazing things with our friend Christopher and many others. Many of the people that I see in this space will be out there. We need volunteers. It's a 3-hour shift, and you get a ticket into the fair to be there for free. And I know some of you hate the fair, but I'm telling you, you will love the Math on a Stick experience. Contact me directly if you have questions. Contact Christopher directly if you have questions. And there's a bit.ly, and I will send out all these links to everybody that registered for this as well. I threw in a link to Rachel's book along with the code that she shared with us for 25% off in the chat. If you scroll up, we are going to be doing a book club on it this fall. So get it. I hear it's great beach reading. And so when you're going to the beach this summer, you want to have this book with you. We're also going to be sending out a summer reading list, and the books we'll be doing as well. And so some of the books we're considering, we probably are going to do a collection of articles and a collection of Minnesota Indigenous children's books. But we're also narrowing down lists of things that we also might use. So we'll send out more information on that. But again, to get this information, you got to join the Minnesota Math Leaders Group. So if you haven't joined, it's one time. Make sure that you scroll up in the chat. You can find the link for the Minnesota Math Leaders and make sure you're there. And please share that with others. And please do that. Oh, last announcement, and Rachel, it's all you. For Q&A, the final meeting in June of the Minnesota Math Leaders PLC, and anybody can come to that. And we're just going to have one meeting in June, and it's going to be